Because the skin is actually the healthy part, right?
I'm not sure if that's true.
I was Googling this recently
yeah?
because I made salmon. Someone on the internet said that it was good for you.
Well, if
Not that
someone
they're
on the internet,
trustworthy.
if someone on the internet said it, it must be true.
It must be true.
Welcome to the Food 52 Test Kitchen. My name is Josh. I'm excited today because we're talking about salmon. A lot of Food 52 community members have been writing in asking questions about salmon. What's the best way to cook it? What's the best way to season it? We brought in the whole side of salmon today because there's a lot of things I want to show in terms of taking the pin bones out, how to portion it, how to feed a large crowd. Once the salmon is portioned, I'm going to show 3 different ways to cook it. It's going to result in 3 different textures. We're going to use a skillet on the stovetop. We're going to poach it gently, and that's going to yield sort of like a softer, almost medium rare texture. And we're going to cook it quickly in the oven on high heat. And some of my coworkers are going to come in the kitchen and see which texture they like the best. I'm excited to be working with the whole side of salmon here. If you want to save some money or you want to feed a large group of people, this is a good way to go. To start with, you always want to check your fish for pin bones. Pin bones are always going to be in a straight line, sort of evenly spaced, and you can feel them just by running your thumb along the top of the fish hair. One other thing to keep in mind as you're taking out the pin bones, there's usually 1 or 2 not just on the top of the fish, but at the front of the fillet also, so don't forget to check that with your thumb as you're pulling them out. So these are fish tweezers. You can also use needle nose pliers if you have those at home, whatever works. I like to have a little cup of water next to me while I'm pulling the pin bones. That way, after each one, I can sort of rinse my tweezers and get rid of the bones. The bones generally are gonna be pointing sort of at an angle forward. So you don't wanna take the bone and rip against the grain. I'm not gonna pull against where the bones are facing. If the bones are sort of facing on a diagonal this way, I want to pull in that direction. That way you don't damage the flesh of the fish. The pin bones generally stop about halfway down the fillet. When you think you've gotten them all, it's good to just take your finger and run it along where those bones are and make sure you haven't missed any. Before I go any further, obviously there's a lot of different types of salmon out there. When you go to your store, if you're curious about like the sustainability of the salmon that is available, check seafoodwatch.org. It's a great resource to determine the fish that's being sold at your local store, the degree to which it's sustainably fished or not. This is an Atlantic salmon. It's organic, it was farmed sustainably, and it's from Ireland. Generally, I'm looking for color of the salmon. If it looks too pale, sometimes I'll pass on it. It's not appealing to me. Salmon that's been beat up or sitting around for too long, you can start to see little like tears. It should look pretty pristine. Once you've bought raw salmon, I'd say cook it that day or the next day. If you're not gonna cook it within 24, 48 hours, you should freeze it and then use it when you're ready to. We're ready to portion the salmon. Before I really get in there, I want to point out one thing. If you're working with a whole fillet, like we are, a whole side of salmon, oftentimes there'll be a piece of the belly attached to like the main fillet of the fish. The belly is going to be thinner than the rest, and it's going to cook sort of differently. It's going to cook faster than the rest of the fish. So one thing you could do if you want to have pieces of salmon that cook nice and uniform and evenly is to remove this thin belly piece from the rest and cook it separately. As I'm portioning this fish out, I'm going to estimate about 6 to 8 ounces per portion. You can eyeball about how much you want to eat as one person. It's going to be maybe a couple inches across. When you're cutting fish, you don't want to saw back and forth. You want to use clean, confident motions with the knife. This still has a skin attached, so one technique I like to use that's going to cut through the fish as well as the skin is using mostly the point of the knife. I'm putting pressure on the tip of the knife here, and that's going to slice through the flesh of the fish, but also the skin. One straight motion. If you want to be a perfectionist, some of this like little fatty area on the side of the fillet, you can trim it off. So if you have a portion that you think is a little too big for one person, rather than cook the whole thing and then try and split it up, I think it's best to slice it in half first before you cook it. Running down the center of the fish toward the skin of the fish, there could be slightly discolored skin. That's called the bloodline On salmon, it's fine. You couldn't really taste a difference. It's just gonna look different. Some fish, the bloodline will taste more bitter, but on salmon, I think it's totally fine to eat. I was gonna show like how to take the skin off the fillet. One important thing first though, if your board is a little bit wet or moist or slimy from working with a bigger piece of fish, stop and grab a towel and dry your board before you start to work with a smaller piece of fish. It's the #1 way you can hurt yourself. Salmon is a fatty, oily fish, and if your hands get sort of greasy like this while you're working with it, it can be easy to slip while you're using the knife. So sometimes I'll use a little paper towel to help me with my grip while I'm holding on to the skin. I'm using the towel to pinch the skin with one hand, and I'm gonna gently sort of pull the skin toward me. With my knife hand, I'm gonna go the opposite direction away. Personally, I like the salmon skin. I like to leave it on, especially you'll see when we sear it in the skillet. I like to have a nice crispy skin. For poaching the fish, it can be nice to take the skin off because when you're poaching, the texture can get sort of gross. So once you've removed the skin, you don't have to throw it away. One thing that some people love is to lay it out on a sheet tray. You can put something heavy on top to keep it from curling up and bake it off in the oven. You make like a little salmon skin garnish, like a crispy cracker. A couple things to keep in mind if you're gonna marinate your salmon. Don't add an ingredient to your marinade that's too acidic. If you add lemon juice or vinegar, this is a gentle fish and the acidity is gonna cook your fish. It's gonna turn into like a ceviche before you even get to cook it from the marinade. Sometimes I think if you have a wet, saucy marinade, when you go to cook it, it can burn or create problems. For instance, if I wanna sear the fish in a skillet on the stovetop, I don't want that marinade sort of caramelizing and potentially burning. And same thing in the oven. If I want to cook my salmon on high heat in the oven, I don't want to run the risk of the marinade burning. In place of the marinade, I'm going to show you one of my favorite sauces to go with the fish. We're going to put it together in the blender really quickly, and we're going to serve that sauce with all the finished salmon dishes today. Slow cooked salmon, sort of medium rare salmon is very popular right now. A lot of people are doing it in the oven. I'm going to show you one way that you can do it in poaching liquid. The reason I like this technique is because I'm regulating the water temperature. It's gonna be somewhere around 125 degrees. That ensures that the fish will never overcook. It's always gonna stay sort of a medium, like very gently, soft, delicate poached fish. For this cooking method, I'm using a piece of fish that we've removed the skin from. The skin has a weird texture if you try and poach it at a low heat like that. When the fish is done cooking, I really like to flake it apart and use it in salads. So for this fish, I'm just gonna give it salt, olive oil, I'm gonna put it in my silicone bag. If you don't have a silicone bag like this, you can use a Ziploc bag, it works fine. If water got in, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but it would dilute the flavor of what you're doing. Part of the reason people like this cooking method is because the bag seals all the natural flavor of the fish in and with itself. If you poach in liquid, you're diluting the flavor of the fish. By using the bag, you're almost concentrating the flavor of the salmon. So the water is about 125 degrees Fahrenheit. It's okay if it's a little bit higher than that because when you drop the fish in, that's gonna lower the temperature of your water slightly. One technique you can use to push the extra air out of the bag, have the bag slightly open when you put the fish in the water, and then as you press the fish down into the water is gonna push the air out of the bag. So when the bag is almost completely submerged, that's when you seal it. The fish should take about 20 minutes to cook, depending on the type of bag you use. The way to check is to just press gently on the fish and you should be able to see that it's cooked through. The broiler is on in the oven. This piece of fish is gonna go in the oven. This is a version of salmon if you want your raw salmon to be cooked all the way through and then you're gonna eat it. Take your fish, throw it in the oven, put it under the broiler until it's done, you take it out and you eat it. I wouldn't wanna put the fish underneath the broiler too close to the broiler because then the fish could burn on the top and still sort of be raw in the center. The fish is in the middle of the oven underneath the broiler. I set the timer for about 5 minutes. The final method of cooking salmon that we're going to show is on the stovetop in a skillet. I like this technique a lot because it allows you to get a really nice crispy skin on the fish. The previous two methods of cooking salmon, I used olive oil because it was sort of a lower cooking time or a lower heat. Here, it's a sustained cooking time at a higher heat, so I'm using a high heat neutral oil like canola oil. The pan is gonna be really hot. I'm gonna lay the fish skin side down in the pan. The moment the fish touches the pan, the skin is gonna wanna curl up. So I'm gonna use my fish spatula to press down on the flesh of the fish to make sure that the skin cooks evenly and doesn't curl. The fish in the skillet is gonna cook almost exclusively skin side down. Only at the last moment am I gonna flip it and touch the flesh of the fish into the skillet for maybe 30 seconds. This is gonna allow the fish to cook slowly and gently, but the skin is gonna stay nice and crispy. So this is a piece of salmon that we just seared in the skillet on the stovetop. I'm happy with how the skin turned out. It's nice and crispy. Also, by cooking it mostly on the skin side and flipping it just at the last second, I think the flesh is gonna be cooked to like a perfect medium. One way to test if you wanted to, you can use a cake tester like this, insert it into the fish, and then press it up against your lip or your arm here. If the cake tester is ripping hot after you do that, then you've probably overcooked your salmon. If your cake tester is ice cold, then it's raw in there. You're looking for a warm sensation on your cake tester after inserting it into the fish. That should be an indication that it's cooked to medium. Because the skin is nice and crispy, when I plate this one, I'm gonna put the sauce down first and the fish on top. I don't wanna put sauce on top of the skin, it'll sog it out. For the broiled fish, this is your sort of simple, no hassle fish. You're not looking for a perfect medium temperature on the inside. You're just looking for it to be cooked straight through, all the way. You can feel the difference. This is gonna feel sort of softer and gentler, and this is gonna feel more firm. You could also use the cake tester again as an indication. This piece of salmon was the one that we took the skin off and we poached it, almost like sous vide style, without all the technology. I'm gonna flake this fish apart because the texture is so unique so that you can see what we're working with. Sometimes I like to flake it apart rather than serving the entire fillet. Erin, Max, welcome to the Food 52 Test Kitchen.
Thank
Excited
you.
for tasting some salmon?
Very.
Yes.
That was a hesitance. There was a hesitancy there.
I'm a recent salmon convert.
Okay.
So I'm a little skeptical, but excited.
So we're gonna taste them first. They're all seasoned identically with the identical sauce, so we're not really tasting for flavor, we're tasting more for texture.
Gotcha.
And then after we've eaten all three, I can reveal to you how they were cooked, or you can guess how you think they might have been cooked. All right, grab a fork. The sauce is like a yogurt and dill kind of herbaceous, creamy
That
sauce.
sounds good.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, looks very soft.
Go over here on the
Tender.
edge.
It's super mild and not overly salmony.
Right, there's not like a very fishy flavor to this
No,
fish.
it's great.
In terms of the texture, I like that there's a moistness to it. It's not dry. I guess I feel like this has sort of a delicate texture.
Totally. It feels very like a sophisticated technique almost.
I feel like I'm going the opposite direction. I feel like this would work well on a sandwich or like some kind of, almost like a burger or something.
Yeah,
Ooh.
I could see that. So that's option number one.
Okay.
Just sort of hold that in your mind. And now for this guy,
Yep.
I like the skin. It's not too. The skin is not too soggy. I think it has a nice little bit
A
of
little
crispiness
crunch
to it.
there.
In terms of the texture of the flesh of the fish, do you notice a difference between this one and that one?
It's definitely a little firmer. A little bit drier, but not in a bad way necessarily. It's just like solid.
Yeah.
Yeah, like more feathery or something. It has.
That's
like a-
interesting.
yeah.
It breaks apart
More
more,
like-
easily too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think if you're the sort of person who wants your fish like cooked all the way through for sure, this might be for you.
Okay.
This first one, that gentler heat, you could potentially get someone who's like, my fish isn't cooked all the way.
Right.
That kind of a vibe though. Even though it is cooked all the way. But. Okay, last one.
Admittedly, I have to say I'm most excited about this.
This
one.
also looks beautiful.
Thank you. This was easier to cut, by the way, too. Now, the inside of this one you could see is almost like rare, like medium rare compared to the other ones. So if you want, like the side of it was a little skinnier, it's more cooked all the way through.
Right.
And the fatter piece is a little more rare. You can sort of choose where you want to taste from.
There you go. Oh, sorry, I took the bigger piece.
I love the skin on top.
Love
it's
the
so
skin.
crispy.
So crispy.
It's good.
You get almost, it's not like a char, but you get that kind of little, not smoky vibe, but
Yeah, smoky is
smoky.
right.
yay.
I think this is a really unique
okay.
texture on
Okay.
that more
All
rare
right.
piece.
So it gets more tender in the middle is what's happening?
Yeah,
More rare.
it's almost
Yeah.
like if you cooked a burger to like medium.
I am gonna go with plate number 3. It's probably my fave.
I think I am too, because you kind of get the best of both worlds with the ends a little firmer and then the other fattier side. It's a little more soft and
Right.
rare. So you kind of get both. I like
That's
that.
interesting where the first two were sort of uniform throughout, but this one had a more difference between the skinny side and the fat side.
Yeah, I kind of like that.
Do you have a way that you
Yeah.
tend to cook it, first of all?
Well, yeah, so when I do cook it, I usually just broil it because
Yeah.
it's so easy.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of feeling ambitious now.
It'd be
Or I'll
fun.
just invite you over.
Fun to try this. And that technique works not just with salmon, but any fish where you want to eat the crispy skin, it's a nice technique to cook it mostly on the skin and just flip it at the last second. Do you
Yeah.
have a way?
I'm the opposite, actually. I normally do it on the pan, but
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go the easy route
Yeah,
this time
yeah.
and just throw it in the oven.
Save yourself some time.
Yeah, I'm too lazy. Why would I spend time over the stove?
There's many, many, many different ways to cook salmon, and all those different ways are great, they're valid. I'm curious what your favorite way to cook salmon is. These are my favorite ways. I had fun making this video. If you had fun watching it, click like, click subscribe, and you can see more stuff like this.